Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Newspaper Article Lucky Dip with myself, Jenny, my most beautiful of co-hosts, Yvette, the bearer of the hat, and Elfie Boy is asleep on the papasan behind the camera, so you might not see him today. We'll borrow this from you, thank you, doll. Trigger warnings? I don't know. I'm never going to know. I don't know what's left in the pot. I can't tell you. What I suggest you do is if you have any sensitivities, any triggering scenarios at all that could inspire negative feelings within you, look down the description below to see what was pulled out the hat this time around so that you're not doing bad things to yourself by watching. Alright, we'll get into this one. It's so cute. To start us off, we have the Dundee, Perth and Cupar Advertiser for the 30th of August 1859, and we'll see what this newspaper has for us. So this is going to be an article that I've come across during the gender fluidity in Scottish history mini docs that I did. This is a female sailor. On Wednesday, a female was charged at Newport, Monmouthshire, with walking about in male attire. The defendant, who wore seaman's clothes, in her appearance, gait and gestures appeared to be every inch a sailor, and in boldness of conduct presented a striking contrast to the quiet-looking seaman, her husband, who stood beside her. It seemed that for no less than 10 years she has scorned her proper clothing and devoted herself to hard and incessant toil. In various capacities she has voyaged to Quebec, Bombay, and other distant places, and at times has shipped in coasters, never shrinking from her share of duty, but loading and unloading the cargoes with the crew. During 2 of the 10 years spoken of, however, she did a little duty on land, working as a navvy upon the railway to Exeter, yet her sex was never suspected. Her last voyage was from Truro as an able-bodied seaman at £2 5 per month. She arrived at Newport a short time ago, but her sex became by some means revealed. The defendant said she was married on the 12th of July last and shipped as cook and steward from Truro about 3 months ago in order to support her husband, who had met with misfortune. The woman was discharged and left the court, obtaining the protection of an omnibus, however, to prevent being mobbed. Why would she be mobbed? Okay. Yeah, there was a lot of this. Lots of women pretending to be men. Most cases it was due to just the sheer difference in pay between the sexes. If you were a man or could get away with promoting yourself as a man, then you could make quite a nice wee living for yourself. Women were so restricted from so many facets of ordinary life that it was obvious that they were going to do this quite a lot. They were going to dress up as men and they were going to make their own way in the world, despite what had been set out for their path previously. And I'm on board. Women standing up for themselves, women showing that they can do as the lads do, and there she managed to make it a decade without being discovered. Obviously, we don't find out how she was discovered. I'm not entirely sure, though, about the being mobbed bit. It says she was discharged, so she's been let go from her duties, I guess. She hasn't been jailed for it. It doesn't say that she was fined or asked to pay back any of the wages she earned. I would assume that would be a hard thing to have her do, considering she actually did the work that she was paid for. And working as a navvy upon a railway back in 1859 as a lassie? I have no idea how she managed to get away with that. Far more able-bodied than her husband, and it doesn't say what his misfortune was, but perhaps he just couldn't work. and she's married him on the 12th of July last. So she's met and married him while still pretending to be a man. And I'm not sure how that worked. I'm not sure how some of these women ended up pregnant. How do you tell who you can and can't let into your secret? Because that was her life as she knew it at an end right there on being found out. Um, I assume there was a lot of press attention regarding it, hence the mob outside the court. I don't know what they would have gained by being able to lay hands on her. I don't know. But good on her. And all others like her who came before. I'll have another one. Fingers aren't working. We have the Perthshire Courier for the 7th of May 1835. See what the Perthshire Courier has for us. So this article is very short and entitled Luci Naturae, which is maybe freaks of nature. It reads, a farmer at the west end of the parish of Fowlis has 3 cows, which lately calved. The first came forth blind, the second without a tail, and the third without ears. The calves are all alive and doing well, but the fretters of the neighbourhood are predicting some strange occurrence from their appearance. Oh yeah, they're going to have seen that as fairly superstitious omen, aren't they? 1835. Yeah, they're going to have seen that as some kind of demonic sign, aren't they? It kind of sounds like the start of an old children's tale, and it then goes on to talk about how each made its way in the world, and it would have a moral of the story that showed how they could all get along, they could all manage and become quite happy, well-fed little cows. I don't know. It kind of sounds like some kind of chemical poisoning. Um, I'm only saying that as a guess based on humans' history with chemicals and the effects that they've had. Was it thalidomide that was touted as an anti-sickness medication? Apparently, it was a very effective anti-sickness medication. And because of that attribute, it was given to pregnant women without tests to find out what the effect on the offspring might be. I don't know that they believed that any chemicals entering the mother's system was going to breach the placental barrier to get to the child. I think they thought that the fetus was its own thing and entirely separate. They learned a thing, didn't they? But that led to humans, children being born with deformed and missing limbs and digits, etc. So it kind of sounds like maybe something has got in, maybe the feed or the water, maybe some kind of pesticide that they were using. I don't think that awful multinationals like Monsanto were on the go in 1835, so we can relieve them of responsibility for the poor wee calves. But it certainly sounds like there's been some kind of contamination, something that's been shared by all 3 cows that have given birth. It doesn't say any more about them. We don't know what came of them. I hope they lived lovely lives on their farm. We'll have another one. The Dundee Courier for the 12th of October 1864. We'll see what the Dundee Courier has. So this is also a short article. We have one of the Holyrood sentries gone mad. On Sabbath morning between 7 and 8 o'clock, a strange occurrence took place in which one of the sentries stationed at Holyrood Palace was the chief actor. He left his post and ascended the adjoining Salisbury Crags and deliberately fired his musket 3 or 4 times in the direction of people who were walking about in the valley below. The guard, hearing the shots, turned out and had him immediately secured, when it was apparent that the poor man had gone deranged, and he was forthwith taken to the hospital in the castle. It doesn't say he killed anyone, so that's a silver lining. It doesn't even say he injured anybody, he just pointed his musket in the direction of people and fired. It doesn't say what happened to him either. I don't know that there'd be a court-martial for something like that. Or perhaps there would be, just to get to the result of having his derangement, his madness, reported and noted and agreed upon before further action was taken on his behalf. He's taken to a hospital. I don't know that he'd have been put in prison even if he was court-martialed and found guilty. I think he would have probably ended up in an asylum of some description, which not a great place to end up in the mid-19th century. You can end up there for all the reasons. But this guy probably needs a little bit of help. It doesn't say if he was talked to, it doesn't say if anything was noted beforehand. His demeanour isn't talked about even after the fact, other than that he had obviously gone deranged. These articles can lack some very interesting pieces of information that we never get to find out about. If I was able to go back in time, I think I would want to become a journalist just so that the articles were better written and answered some actual questions on the matter, because it can be quite frustrating sometimes. We'll have another one. It's all been quite short articles so far. This may be our last one. We have the Dundee Courier for the 17th of April 1900. We'll see what this article has for us. This article will definitely finishes. It's somewhat longer in length. It's entitled Fortunes of the Fight, Bullets with Very Strange Billets. How many strange stories could be told of the fortunes of Tommy Atkins in the fight? Some soldiers really lead a charmed life, as the incidents of the present and many other campaigns abundantly show. One of the skulls preserved at the Army Medical Museum contains a bullet which entered the right eye and lodged in the base of the brain. It is the skull of a corporal who received the wound at Fredericksburg in 1862. The ball is embedded in the bone behind the eye, and that the man should have survived an hour seems wonderful. He actually lived, however, for 2 months, and then suddenly dropped dead one day when the surgeons thought he had recovered. During the recent Battle of Belmont, a wounded private of the Durham Regiment was lying far out on the veldt, where he had evidently been overlooked by the bearers from the camp, and he was near to the point of fainting from loss of blood. He had sufficient strength to place his mouth to the flask containing his brandy, but lacked the power to remove the stopper, which had been fastened tightly during the brunt of battle. A bullet from a sharpshooter in the hills, however, pierced a hole clean through Tommy's flask a minute later, and in the nick of time to afford him the stimulant which probably saved his life. A Union soldier who fought at Antietam was rendered hors de combat, incapable of performing his duties, by a round shot that took off his forearm and hand, severing the member above the elbow. It is a marvel that he was not killed, inasmuch as in such cases death is apt to ensue immediately from the shock. However, he recovered, and a few months later he went back to the field of conflict and found the missing member. It had fallen in a dry place, where instead of decaying, it had become shriveled up like the arm of a mummy. It's not an artifact I'd want to take home with me. McCormick, the famous surgeon, mentions a case of a trooper who had a tumour forming near his left lung. The fateful growth would doubtless have terminated his career in a manner both painful and premature, but for the marvellous aid rendered by a Boer bullet, which, in forcing its peculiar passage through the man's body, removed the tumour and saved the soldier's life. Chance created some odd occurrences during the American Civil War. There were numerous instances where bullets fired by Union soldiers and Confederates at each other met in mid-air and rendered one another harmless. 2 such rifle balls are now preserved in the War Apartment at Washington. They were found fused together on the field of battle at Petersburg. A soldier who fought through the last Sudan campaign tells of a marvellous deliverance wrought for him by a truant bullet. It transpired that he was running after one of the enemy, who had been spearing his wounded comrades, when he tripped and stumbled over the body of a dead Arab. His enemy returned and was about to lance him, when a stray bullet broke his wrist and afforded the fallen soldier the chance he desired to rise and act on the defensive. Quite a vivid notion of the unpleasantness of warfare is afforded by the trunk of a tree now in the National Museum. It was exposed to a particularly hot fire during a series of sharp battles, was actually cut clean in two by flying rifle bullets. The tree is nearly 2 feet thick. A gallant trooper in General Buller's army had his boot heel pierced by a bullet. He dismounted to see whether he could readjust his spur, and while so engaged in a kneeling position, a shell passed over his head with a weird scream, killing his horse and almost blinding the soldier with the rush of dust it created. But the truant bullet had saved his life. A private soldier was wounded at the Battle of Tupelo in 1864. A bullet struck him in the head, ploughing along the scalp. He died 9 days later. The surgeons wondered why he had succumbed, inasmuch as the skull, though laid bare, did not seem to be injured at all. In fact, as proved by a post-mortem examination, was that the inside layer of the bone, or the lower table as the anatomists call it, had been fractured. Thus the brain suffered injury, while the skull, to all appearances from the outside, was left whole. That was like a lot of good luck stories followed by a, oh, bad luck, mate. Your wound seemed like you would survive, but it's how it falls sometimes. What? Well, those are quite some stories. I think I've seen the bullets that hit each other. I've seen pictures of those. I mean, trees being shot through. You get gun nuts in America do that anyway as a pastime, I think. Is it cactuses they shoot more than trees? I think it's cactuses. Cactuses? Cacti? They'll go out and they'll shoot at a cactus until the cactus falls in half. Was there a guy not crushed and killed by a cactus that he'd been shooting? I think that happened. Going off in tangents again. So I believe that. I believe the 2-foot thick tree being cut in half by bullets. I mean, yes, yes. There, if you think of how many hundreds of thousands of people, because again, women did take part as men in the armies, apparently throughout the world for a while. There are so many hundreds of thousands of people enacting warfare against each other over the course of centuries. You're going to have some crazy coincidences come out of all of those interactions. My, see, a great uncle, William Caldwell, he was in the American War. He was from Greenock, and he was given the moniker of sharpshooter extraordinaire. He kept winning prizes for his marksmanship, and he went over to the States to after the Civil War to take part in contests where he represented Scotland or Britain. Hi, future editing Jen here. Now, I relate a story here about my great uncle ish. His name was William Caldwell, and he took part in the American Civil War. It was really just to show just how many people took part in this war. That it wasn't just people in the States. William Caldwell was from Greenock. I get a couple of wee things incorrect in my relaying of his story, so I thought I'd just read it to you. It's taken from the Greenock Herald for Saturday, the 1st of March, 1884. And it tells us that while he was born in Ayrshire, Scotland in 1839, just 20 years later, he took an abrupt leave of home to try his fortunes in New York, where he was living when the war broke out. The son of his employer, Hugh Watts by name, was then a member of Company F, 12th Regiment of the city, and he, taking a sudden fancy for soldiering, joined that company too, and performed a regular 3 months' service in the field. But I thought I'd like to see some more campaigning, said he, and so when a friend of mine, Captain Crombie, offered me a sergeantcy in a company he was raising for the 51st New York Volunteers, I accepted the offer at once. The regiment was sent to Annapolis first, and then participated in the capture of Roanoke Island under Burnside, and going thence to Fredericksburg, fell under General Pope's command, and was present at the Second Battle of Manassas, and in numerous fights along the Rappahannock. At Antietam, the regiment won much glory along with the 21st Massachusetts and 51st Pennsylvania, and there were so many non-commissioned officers fell that Caldwell found himself first sergeant. He went through the terrific slaughter of Burnside's attack at Fredericksburg, and then went on a 10 days furlough, at the end of which he found himself second lieutenant. In trying to board a moving train at this time, in his anxiety to join his regiment, he slipped, and a portion of his toes was cut off by the wheels. He only remained in hospital for 1 day and went on duty at once as commissary to General Wilcox. He returned to the 51st as first lieutenant on March the 14th, 1864, and with it took part in Grant's operations against Vicksburg. He was next in the Battle of the Wilderness and aided in the construction of the disastrous Petersburg mine. He was wounded slightly at this place, and August 11th, 1864, was gazetted as captain and made prisoner with a large part of his command on the same day. He tells with great enjoyment how he saved his money, $200, at Libby, by hiding it in the lining of his cap when he was searched. He was removed to Salisbury and there engaged in a plot to overcome the guards, which, however, was discovered, and he and other officers were sent to Danville. He was soon exchanged and was present at the surrender of Lee. When he got his discharge, he went home on a visit, but was induced to settle in Greenock, where he now lives. So there you go. So, yeah, crazy stories. Were they all from... No, I was going to say they can't all be from the Civil War. There's at least a couple from the Civil War, but they're talking about the Sudan campaign, and I'm going to have to look into a few of these anyway, and get some extra backup information because a lot of these are really interesting wee stories just in their own right. Oh well, Elfie boy has woken up, so Nay, we'll need to go and grab him something to eat, I think. A wee treat of some description. So we may see you next time. Take care.